Snow clawed at the cabin walls like a living thing, each gust rattling the shutters and hissing through cracks in the timbers. Ezekiel Carver stood in the doorway, broad shoulders braced against the cold, an axe dangling loosely in one hand. For 30 winters he had faced storms like this one, storms that swallowed sound, swallowed thought, and left him alone with the ghosts of his past. His beard was caked with ice, his breath a steady plume in the dark. The rifle leaning by the fire behind him seemed more companion than tool. He squinted into the white void beyond the pines, not expecting anything but snow and silence. Yet a man who has lived so long alone listens differently. He feels what others miss. Tonight, something was off. Zeke was a man carved down to essentials, as weathered and stubborn as the granite ridges that hemmed his valley. Once, long ago, he had not been alone. He remembered the warmth of a wagon fire, the smell of biscuits rising in an iron pan, his wife's laughter bouncing across the plains. He remembered, too, the final horror, the sudden raid, faces painted in the firelight, his infant son's cry cut short in the chaos. By dawn he had nothing but blooded hands and an emptiness that the years could never fill. He buried love in shallow earth and turned his back on men, swearing never to need another soul again. The mountains accepted him. They took what was left and shaped it into a survivor. He learned which trees groaned before they fell, which hollows sheltered elk, which creeks froze last. He knew the rhythm of snowshoes, the crack of spring thaw, the silence before a cougar's strike. The world beyond dwindled to rumor and dust. In nearby towns, children whispered his name like a fireside story. Ezekiel Carver, the mountain hermit, a ghost who outlived wolves. Zeke never cared. The mountains were enough. Still, solitude leaves marks no frost can hide. He spoke often to his mule, Whiskey Jack, a grey beast with ears like sails and a temper as stubborn as his master's. "You're the only one listens proper," Zeke muttered one morning as the mule refused to budge from the stable. He tugged at the halter, cursed, then chuckled despite himself. "Hell, maybe you're smarter than me." In the hush of wilderness, even small absurdities became lifelines. Whiskey Jack brayed, and for a fleeting instant, the sound almost passed for company. Most nights Zeke read the woods instead of books. Tonight, though, he noticed signs that pricked the skin. A smoke plume curling faint against the storm horizon, too thin to be lightning-struck timber, too steady to be chance. Tracks in the snow where no settler should be, the stride narrow, lighter than men. And the howls he heard last dusk, too many, too clustered to be wolves hunting deer. He told himself these were trifles, the mind wandering in deep winter. Yet unease clung like frost to his bones. Inside the cabin, firelight painted the logs with a warm glow. Pelts hung drying, traps leaned in a corner, iron pots hissed where stew bubbled slow. Zeke moved through the space with a soldier's precision, every item in its place. He should have felt secure, but the storm carried a sound that did not belong. A cry, thin, human, shivering on the wind. He froze, listening hard. Perhaps imagination, perhaps the storm itself. But then it came again, faint and drawn out. Voices. He gripped the rifle by the hearth and stepped back into the night. Snow whipped his face, needling his eyes, yet he heard them clearer now, the desperate timbre of women, strained and broken. The sound reached something deep inside, a memory he tried for decades to bury. Mary's scream on the night she died. His baby's startled wail. He shut his eyes, steadying his breath, telling himself the wind was tricking him. But the voices rose again, carried on the gale, and Zeke knew they were real. His jaw clenched, a storm within the storm. For 30 years he had guarded his silence, his solitude. He wanted no visitors, no entanglements, no reminders. Yet the mountain had delivered something, or someone, onto his doorstep, and a man cannot unhear a cry for help. He turned back toward the cabin, snow crunching under heavy boots, mind wrestling between caution and instinct. He knew one truth for certain, whatever those voices meant, his 30 quiet winters had just ended. Zeke trudged through the storm with his rifle cradled in his arms, every step a battle against the wind that bit like knives. The voices pulled him onward, wavering, sometimes vanishing beneath the howl of snow, only to rise again with ragged desperation. His instinct screamed to turn back, to let the storm bury whatever shadows wandered the mountains, but a deeper part of him, an old, half-dead part that once loved, refused to ignore them. The mountain had hardened him, not stripped him of humanity. Through a break in the trees, he saw them. Figures huddled in the drift, no more than dark lumps against the whiteness. As he drew closer, the shapes resolved into women, 10 in number, their clothing torn, blankets wrapped tight but useless against the cold. Frost rimmed their hair, their lips cracked and trembling. One tried to rise, spear in hand, though it was no more than a stick tipped with stone. Her stance was defiant, but the weakness in her body betrayed the truth. Zeke stopped a few yards away, rifle raised, eyes hard. He had faced cougars, grizzlies, and desperate men in his time, but the sight of these women stirred an unease he could not name. The leader, taller than the rest, met his gaze with flint in her eyes. She spoke English roughened by accent but clear enough. "We seek shelter. Only shelter. Or we die here." Her words struck like a hammer blow. Zeke's grip tightened on the rifle. He knew their kind. Apache. Memories flooded him, painted faces in firelight, the night his family was taken. His chest knotted, rage and grief rising like bile. For years he had blamed them, faceless and endless in his mind, the embodiment of his loss. Now here they stood, flesh and bone, pleading for life. "No room here," he growled, his voice hoarse with old hatred. "Storm'll pass. Move along." The women murmured among themselves, eyes darting between him and the dark trees. One stumbled forward, collapsing into the snow at his boots. She could barely lift her head, lips whispering words he couldn't understand. Her body shook violently, skin already blue with cold. He looked down, rifle steady, and for a long moment considered turning away. If he let the mountain take them, no one would know, no one would care. But Zeke would know. And that knowledge, heavy as a stone, would crush what little was left of him. With a curse bitten off between his teeth, he slung the rifle over his shoulder and bent to lift the fallen woman. She was weightless, like lifting a bundle of sticks. He turned to the others, his voice sharp as a whip. "Cabins this way. Keep up if you want to live." They followed, silent except for the crunch of snow and the low moans of the weakest among them. Suspicion hung between them like smoke. Zeke kept his eyes forward, jaw locked, trying not to see Mary in their faces, trying not to hear his child's cry in their shivering breaths. Back at the cabin, warmth rushed out as he shoved the door wide. The women shuffled in, hesitating as though expecting a trap. Zeke laid the unconscious one near the fire, then threw another log into the flames. Sparks leapt, light dancing across the cramped space. The women clustered together, whispering rapidly in their tongue, eyes never leaving him. He could feel their mistrust as keenly as his own. "Sit," he ordered gruffly, gesturing to the hearth. "Dry yourselves. Food's thin, but it'll keep you breathing." He ladled stew into a tin cup and thrust it toward the leader. She accepted with steady hands, though her eyes remained sharp, weighing him like a judge. They ate sparingly, passing cups back and forth, each sip measured, each bite a gift. Zeke sat apart, rifle propped within reach. The storm raged outside, but inside the cabin another storm brewed, silent, tense, built of histories neither side could name aloud. The leader broke the silence at last. "I am Nightshare. We are exiled." Her voice carried no plea, only statement. "Our people cast us out. We walk or we die. Tonight, the mountain would have chosen death." Zeke said nothing. The truth was simple enough. He didn't want them here. 10 mouths, 10 reminders of everything he had lost. Yet as the firelight revealed the hollows of their cheeks, the frostburn on their skin, he knew he could not send them back into the storm. One of the younger women let out a nervous laugh as Whiskey Jack brayed from the stable. Zeke scowled, but the sound tugged at the corner of his mouth despite himself. He muttered, "Damn mules got more sense than all of us put together." A ripple of amusement passed through the group, brief but real. For the first time in years, Zeke heard laughter not his own. It unsettled him more than silence. Still, trust was a currency scarce as gold in these mountains. He slept that night with his rifle across his knees, half dozing, ears tuned to every movement. The women huddled close by the fire, their whispers rising and falling like the rustle of dry leaves. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw Mary, saw blood on snow, saw painted faces in the dark. The old wound throbbed raw again, reminding him why he had sworn to live alone. And yet, even as exhaustion pulled at him, a strange thought slipped through. Perhaps the mountain had sent them, not as punishment, but as some crooked chance at reckoning. He shook the notion away, cursing himself for weakness. These women were strangers, intruders, nothing more. Near dawn, the fire burned low. Zeke stirred the embers, staring into the coals. Then he froze. Outside, beneath the dying storm, he caught movement. A flicker in the shadows, too measured for the wind, too heavy for deer. He rose, rifle in hand, heart tightening. The women stirred at his sudden tension. Through the narrow crack of the shutter, he saw them, dark shapes moving between the trees, slow, deliberate, circling the cabin. Not wolves. Men. The hair on his neck bristled. He gripped the rifle tighter, breath steadying into iron. The women's eyes followed his, fear flickering in their faces. Whatever storm had brought them here, it was not finished. And outside, danger waited with patient steps. The first light of dawn broke faint and grey over the treetops, but it brought no warmth. Zeke crouched by the shutter, rifle steady, eyes tracking the shadows that slipped like wolves through the thinning storm. There were at least a dozen of them, maybe more, moving with the quiet menace of men accustomed to killing. He knew their kind, outlaws, scavengers of the frontier, drawn by rumor of the Apache women like vultures circling carrion. The leader revealed himself soon enough. He stepped into the open, a broad-shouldered figure with a coat of wolf pelts and a sneer carved deep into his face. Even through the frost-hazed glass, Zeke recognized the cruelty etched into his posture. Clayton Riggs. Zeke had heard of him years ago in distant mining camps, a man who sold bullets for coin and lives for amusement. Riggs's voice carried clear across the snow. "Morning, hermit. Step aside and hand 'em over. Them squaws fetch a fine price, dead or alive, don't matter to me." Zeke's jaw clenched. He could feel the women behind him stiffen, their whispers breaking into fearful silence. Nietzsche moved closer, her eyes sharp as flint, waiting for his answer. He didn't look at her. His gaze never left Riggs. "Not yours to take," Zeke growled. The words tasted strange in his mouth, as though spoken by someone he had once been. Riggs chuckled, the sound brittle and cold. "Didn't think you'd gone soft, Carver. Thought you lived up here 'cause you hated people. Don't tell me a pack of half-starved women's enough to turn your heart." Zeke said nothing, but his silence was answer enough. Riggs spat into the snow and signaled with 2 fingers. The outlaws fanned out, rifles raised, shadows pressing in from every side. The first shot cracked like thunder. A pane of glass shattered, spraying splinters across the cabin. Zeke shoved the women flat, then returned fire. His bullet struck true, one outlaw spun and dropped, blood staining the snow. The cabin erupted into chaos. Gunfire slammed into the walls, smoke thickened, and the women clutched one another, eyes wide with terror. Zeke moved with grim efficiency, every motion born of 3 decades of survival. He fired, ducked, reloaded, shifted positions. Each breath was measured, each shot deliberate. The recoil rattled his shoulder, the smell of gunpowder seared his nostrils, but he fought without hesitation. A sudden whistle split the air. An arrow streaked past Zeke's ear and buried itself in an outlaw's chest. One of the women, slender, fierce-eyed, with a bow gripped tight, stood in the shadows of the cabin, loosing another shaft. "Taya," Nietzsche barked her name. Zeke spared her a glance of grim respect before turning back to the fight. The snow outside churned with movement, men shouting, falling, firing wild. Zeke reloaded, slammed another round through the crack in the shutters, and saw Riggs himself duck behind a pine, bellowing orders. The outlaws pressed harder, bullets punching into the log walls, one grazing Zeke's arm and burning like fire. He ignored the pain, mind narrowing to the rhythm of survival. In the heat of it, memories surged unbidden. He saw Mary again, her hair whipping in the firelight, saw the painted faces that ended her life. Rage clawed at him, threatening to blind him. But then he saw something else, Taya standing tall, bowstring taut, her young face carved with the same determination Mary once wore when she fought to keep their child warm in the wagon. The vision snapped him back. This wasn't about the past. This was here. This was now. The battle raged on. One outlaw tried the rear door, only to meet Nietzsche's spear thrust clean through his gut. He screamed once before silence took him. The women moved with desperate unity, dragging logs to brace the door, dousing rags in water to smother sparks when Riggs's men tried to set fire to the walls. What began as terror hardened into defiance. Hours blurred. Gunpowder smoke hung thick in the air, mixing with the acrid scent of blood. Zeke's arms ached, his wounded shoulder stiffened, but he did not falter. Each time Riggs's men surged, they met steel, arrow, or lead. And each time they fell back, fewer than before. Finally, silence. The snow lay trampled and red beyond the cabin, bodies scattered like broken branches. The survivors dragged their wounded away, curses fading into the trees. Riggs stood last, snarling, his eyes locked on Zeke's. He raised his rifle, then lowered it slowly, a twisted smile curling his lips. "You think this is done, old man? You bought yourself a few hours, maybe. Sunrise, we'll be back. And this time, We burn it all down." His words carried like a promise, bitter and certain. Then he vanished into the tree line, his men slinking behind him. Inside, the cabin was wrecked. Bullet holes peppered the logs, smoke seeped from smoldering rags, and the floor was slick with blood. Zeke leaned against the hearth, chest heaving, rifle slack in his hands. The women gathered around the fire, exhausted, bruised, but alive. Taya bound his arm with a strip of cloth torn from her own dress, her hand steady though her face was pale. For a moment, there was no sound but the crackle of the fire and the distant moan of the wind. Then Nietzsche spoke, voice low but firm. "They will come again. Stronger. You know this." Zeke met her gaze. In her eyes he saw no plea, no fear, only the reflection of the fight still to come. Something stirred in him, a flicker long buried. Purpose. He straightened, pushing the pain aside. "Then we'll be ready." The women looked to him, not with trust yet, but with the fragile beginnings of it. The storm had passed, but another storm, man-made, merciless, was closing fast. And Ezekiel Carver, who had once chosen to live alone, now found himself standing with 10 strangers, bound by the blood already spilled and the greater blood yet to come. The night before the reckoning stretched long and heavy, every minute thick with the weight of what was coming. Zeke sat sharpening his knife by the fire, each stroke ringing soft, deliberate. The women moved quietly around him, repairing torn garments, tending to the wounded, melting lead into bullets. Every face bore the exhaustion of battle, yet beneath it burned something fiercer, resolve. The cabin, once a refuge of solitude, now breathed with shared purpose, every heartbeat joined in the knowledge that dawn would bring blood. Outside, the storm had died, leaving the land eerily still. The mountains loomed sharp against the stars, their silence like a judge's gaze. Zeke stepped out into the frost, the cold biting deeper than any blade. He scanned the tree line, every sense straining for movement. Nothing yet. But Riggs's promise rang in his ears like scripture. They would come. Back inside, Nietzsche approached, carrying strips of cured meat. She placed them by his side without a word, then crouched opposite him. Firelight carved her face in bronze, the lines of hardship etched deep. "You have fought alone many winters," she said softly. "Why do you fight with us now?" Zeke paused, blade hovering over whetstone. The answer did not come easy. He thought of Mary, of the baby he'd buried beneath frozen soil, of 30 winters spent hiding from memory. He thought of the faces around him now, 10 women who should have perished in the snow but hadn't, because he had lifted one from the drift. Perhaps that single act had already chosen the rest. He set the knife down, voice rough. "Because I'm tired of burying people I could have saved." Nietzsche's eyes softened, but she said nothing more. She returned to the others, leaving Zeke alone with his thoughts and the ticking heartbeat of the fire. For the first time in decades, he wasn't waiting for death, he was preparing to live long enough to face it head-on. When dawn came, it came blood-red. The horizon glowed like iron fresh from the forge, spilling light over the snowdrifts. And with it came the riders. Riggs led them, his wolfskin coat snapping in the wind, his rifle slung across his chest. 24 men followed, hard-eyed, armed, eager. They spread in a wide circle around the cabin, their hooves churning snow into powder. Inside, the women tightened their grips on spears, bows, and knives. Zeke moved to the window, rifle ready, his voice low but steady. "Remember, don't waste a shot. Make it count." His words were simple, but they bound them together like iron nails. Riggs called out, voice booming. "Last chance, Carver. Step aside, and maybe I'll let you keep Breathin." Zeke leaned through the shutter crack, rifle aimed. "You'll get my answer in lead." The world exploded. Gunfire ripped the air, arrows whistled, powder smoke rolled thick. Bullets slammed into the cabin walls, splinters flying. Zeke fired, reloaded, fired again, each shot driving back the surge. Nietzsche and 2 others loosed arrows in deadly rhythm, dropping men from their saddles. Taya darted from shadow to shadow, her bow a blur of motion. Riggs roared, urging his men forward. They charged the cabin, torches blazing, intent on fire. Zeke flung the door open and met them head-on, rifle but cracking skull, knife slashing close. Blood steamed on the snow. A spear thrust from inside skewered another outlaw as he tried to force the doorway. The battle spilled beyond the cabin, into the yard where smoke and snow tangled in a deadly haze. Zeke fought like a man possessed, his body screaming with fatigue, his mind sharp with purpose. Every strike was for Mary, for the child he lost, but also for the strangers who now stood beside him. Riggs came at last, bellowing, axe in hand, eyes lit with savage glee. He slammed into Zeke with the weight of a bull, the axe biting deep into the doorframe as Zeke twisted aside. They grappled in the snow, fists and blades flashing. Riggs was younger, heavier, fueled by greed. Zeke was leaner, hardened by decades of survival, fueled by something Riggs could never know, redemption. The fight was brutal, raw. Snow sprayed under their boots, blood spattered the frost. Riggs slammed Zeke down, fists hammering, snarling curses. Zeke's vision blurred, his ribs groaned under the impact. But in the roar of it, he saw Mary's face again, saw her eyes not in terror, but in memory of love. And beyond that, he saw Nightshare and the others, standing fierce, refusing to be broken. Something inside him rose, an old, buried flame catching once more. With a guttural cry, Zeke drove his knife upward. The blade struck deep beneath Riggs's ribs. Riggs's eyes widened, shock replacing rage, and he stumbled back, blood pouring into the snow. He tried to speak, but only a gurgle escaped. Then he fell, still. The outlaws faltered at the sight, their leader dead. Some fled into the trees, others dropped their weapons, broken of will. The women pressed the retreat, arrows flying until the last rider vanished into the forest. Silence returned, heavy and final. Zeke staggered, breath ragged, blood soaking his sleeve and staining his beard. Nightshare caught him before he fell, her strength steady, her eyes bright with something more than relief. Around them, the women stood tall, battered but alive, their breath steaming in the cold air. The cabin smoldered, scarred by bullets, but it still stood. For a long time, no one spoke. The mountains loomed, silent witnesses to what had been carved into their slopes this day. Then Nightshare lifted her voice, chanting softly in Apache, a prayer that rose and wove through the smoke. The others joined, their voices trembling but strong. Zeke closed his eyes, letting the sound wash through him, strange and unfamiliar yet somehow healing. When it ended, he looked at them, his voice rasping but clear. "You're safe now. Long as I'm breathtaking, you're safe." It was a promise, not just to them, but to himself. He had lived 30 winters alone, burying love beneath stone and snow. But in one storm, in one battle, something had shifted. He was no longer just a hermit waiting to die. He was a man who had fought, and chosen, and lived for others again. As dusk bled over the mountains, the cabin glowed with firelight, laughter rising faint but real. Zeke sat by the hearth, arm bound, staring into the flames. The ghosts still lingered, but they no longer chained him. He was part of something now, a family forged in blood and fire. And the mountains, which had held him in silence for so long, seemed to echo back a truth he had almost forgotten. Even the loneliest man can find redemption. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.